Lisa Gonzalez never imagined that responding to an ad for a temporary photographer for art collection cataloging would end with her heart captured by the most inaccessible man in Houston. When her fingers trembled as she pressed the doorbell of the imposing mansion on the outskirts of the city, she didn't know she was about to enter not just a luxurious property, but the life of a man who had sworn never to fall in love again. The door opened, revealing not the reclusive millionaire she expected, but a butler with an austere expression who led her down the polished marble hallway. "Mr. Williams is in the winter garden," he informed her in a monotonous voice, as if Lisa were just another in a long list of temporary employees who crossed that portal without leaving a trace. But Lisa wasn't tea like the others. With her camera hanging from her neck and eyes that noticed details most people ignored, she captured more than images. She captured essences. At 28, after a series of frustrating jobs at commercial photography studios, she yearned for something that would truly challenge her creativity. And it was this desire that led her to accept a job that paid 3 times more than any other she had ever had, even if it was for only 3 months. The winter garden was an explosion of life amid the calculated luxury of the mansion. Exotic plants flourished under the light that entered through glass panels, creating an almost poetic contrast with the sterile exterior. It was there that she saw him for the first time. Mark Williams, 34, owner of the largest marketing and advertising agency in Texas, known both for his revolutionary campaigns and for his aversion to public appearances since his parents' death in an accident 2 years ago. "You must be the new photographer," he said without turning around, his eyes fixed on a rare orchid. His voice had an unexpectedly soft quality for someone with such an intimidating reputation. "Lisa Gonzalez," she replied, extending a hand that he completely ignored. "I am here for the cataloging job." He finally turned, and Lisa felt the impact of those blue-gray eyes. They weren't cold, as the tabloids said, but carried a disturbing depth, like an ocean that hides secrets in its depths. Rule number 1, don't touch anything besides your equipment. Rule number 2, finish the job within the established time frame. Rule number 3, stay away from my private spaces. He spoke like someone dictating contract terms without inflections or emotions. "The collection is in the East Wing. Martha will show you your room and the areas where you can circulate." Lisa felt a twinge of irritation. "I have some rules too, Mr. Williams." The words came out before she could contain them. Rule number 1, I treat everyone with respect and expect the same. Rule number 2, my work is impeccable when I have creative autonomy. And rule number 3, I'm not your employee, I am a professional contracted for a specific service. Mark raised an eyebrow, visibly surprised by the response. A tense silence settled between them, broken only by the distant sound of water running in some fountain in the garden. "Interesting," he finally murmured. "The last person who spoke to me in that tone was my mother." An almost imperceptible smile touched his lips before vanishing. "All right, Miss Gonzalez, creative autonomy granted, as long as the cataloging is accurate. As for respect," he made a studied pause, "it will have to be earned, like everything in this house." What Lisa didn't know, as she followed Martha through corridors decorated with artwork that would be worth more than everything she had ever owned in her life, was that Mark Williams was watching her through the security system, intrigued by something he couldn't quite define. Perhaps it was the way she looked at each piece of art, not with greed or indifference, but with genuine appreciation. Or perhaps it was simply because, for the first time in 2 years, someone had looked at him and seen the man, not the myth, not the fortune, not the tragedy. What neither of them could predict was that this initial encounter, filled with tension and explicit rules, would be just the first chapter of a story that would challenge all the rules they had established for their lives. Because sometimes the most perfect photographs are those captured when we least expect it, in moments of absolute vulnerability that no lens can really filter. And as Lisa unpacked her suitcase in the luxurious room that would be her home for the next 3 months, an old photograph on the bedside table caught her attention. A young Mark, smiling openly next to a middle-aged man and woman with his same penetrating eyes. Mr. Williams smiling. That indeed deserved to be catalogued as a rarity, she thought, not imagining that she would soon be responsible for bringing that smile back to the face of the man who now seemed incapable of showing any emotion. Dawn at the Williams mansion. Painted golden shadows on the walls when Lisa woke up for her first official day of work. She dressed carefully, comfortable jeans and a button-up shirt that gave her mobility without sacrificing professional appearance. Her camera, a Canon she had saved for years to buy, seemed almost out of place in that environment of ostentatious wealth. The East Wing, dedicated to the art collection, was a labyrinth of thematic rooms that would make any museum envious. Modernist, sculptures, Renaissance paintings, historical photographs. Each piece told a story, not just about its creator, but about who had chosen them. "I see you," we started early. Lisa almost dropped her camera. Mark was standing at the door, impeccable in his navy blue suit, observing her with that disconcerting intensity. "I always start at sunrise. The natural light at this time is irreplaceable," she replied, regaining her composure. "Besides, I thought you'd prefer me to work when you weren't around to be disturbed." He took a few steps into the room, approaching an abstract painting Lisa had just photographed. "This was my mother's favorite," he commented, surprising. "Her with the personal information. She used to say that art doesn't need to be understood to be felt." Lisa lowered her camera, looking from the painting to Mark. "Your mother seemed like a wise woman." And she hesitated before adding, "I know about the accident. I'm sorry." Mark visibly stiffened. "I don't need your pity, Ms. Gonzalez. I just need you to do your job." "It is not pity," Lisa retorted. "It is empathy. There's a difference." She repositioned her camera, focusing on another work. "And please call me Lisa. Ms. Gonzalez makes me feel like I am in a perpetual job interview." To her surprise, Mark let out a brief laugh, a hoarse sound, as if it wasn't used frequently. Different from what I expected." Lisa stared at him, intrigued. "And what exactly did you expect?" "Someone who would accept the check without asking questions. Someone who wouldn't notice that this collection is more than an investment." He made a comprehensive gesture to the works around them. "Most people only see the monetary value." "Well, I am not most people," Lisa replied, returning to work. "And if you want to know, I think some of these pieces are poorly positioned. The lighting doesn't enhance the details." Mark crossed his arms, but there was more curiosity than irritation in his expression. "Is that so? And what would be your suggestion, Ms. Lisa?" Lisa spent the next 2 hours explaining lighting principles and how each work could be better appreciated with small adjustments. To her surprise, Mark not only listened, but asked pertinent questions, revealing an art knowledge she hadn't expected from a marketing businessman. You really understand art," she observed, as they repositioned a delicate sculpture together. "I grew up surrounded by these pieces. My father was a passionate collector before becoming a successful businessman," he explained, and for a moment, the mask of coldness completely dissolved. "Well, he was the one who taught me that marketing isn't just about selling products, but about telling stories that resonate." The moment of vulnerability was interrupted by Mark's cell phone. After a brief conversation, he turned to Lisa with a closed expression again. I have to go. A crisis at the agency. Continue with your work, but..." He paused, as if choosing his words. "Your suggestions about repositioning are valid. Feel free to implement them." When he left, Lisa realized she had been holding her breath. There was something about Mark Williams that destabilized her. It wasn't just his undeniably attractive appearance or his wealth, but the glimpses of the man behind the cold facade that he tried so hard to maintain. In the days that followed, Lisa immersed herself in work, methodically photographing each piece while implementing her suggestions for arrangement. At night, while editing the photos on her laptop, Martha, the middle-aged housekeeper who seemed to be the only employee capable of speaking more than 2 sentences in a row, began bringing tea and cookies to her room. "I've never seen Mr. Williams spend so much time in the art wing as yesterday," Martha commented one of those nights, meticulously arranging the tray. "Since the accident, he barely looks at the collection, says it hurts too much." Lisa looked up from the photographs. "He seems to carry a lot of pain." Martha nodded, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "His parents were all he had. He dedicated himself so much to building the advertising empire that he put his personal life aside. When he finally decided it was time to find balance, the accident happened." The housekeeper sighed deeply. "Now he hides in this mansion and that agency, as if punishing himself for being alive." That conversation lingered in Lisa's thoughts as she worked in the following days. She observed Mark with new eyes, noting the signs of fatigue, the way he occasionally stopped in front of certain works with a distant look, as if recalling past conversations. One morning, a week later, Lisa found a notification in her email about an outdoor photography workshop that would take place in Houston's Central Park. It was taught by a photographer she deeply admired, and without thinking twice, she signed up. It would be on a Saturday, and she could make up the hours during the week. What she didn't expect was to find Mark Williams among the participants, as out of place in his casual shirt as a penguin in the desert. "Mr. Williams?" Lisa couldn't hide her surprise. "I didn't know you had an interest in photography." Mark seemed equally surprised but recovered quickly. "My therapist suggested I look for activities unrelated to work." He hesitated, as if deciding how much to reveal. "And I found an old photo album of my father, H2Es. He was quite talented." "So it adds a connection to him," Lisa concluded, feeling an unexpected tenderness for Mark's attempt to reconnect with the past. "Something like that," he admitted, seeming uncomfortable with his own vulnerability. "And you? Don't you have enough photographs to take at the mansion?" Lisa smiled. "Photography isn't to just work for me. It is how I breathe." She paused, gathering courage. "Besides, I needed a day away. Your house is beautiful, but sometimes it feels like the walls hold so much sadness that it's hard to breathe." Mark stared at her for a long moment, and Lisa feared she had crossed a line, but then he nodded slowly. "That is exactly how I feel, as if the house is still waiting for them to return." During the workshop, Lisa watched fascinated as Mark absorbed each instruction with the same concentration he would devote to a $1 million campaign. There was something touching about seeing him trying to properly frame a wildflower, his forehead furrowed in concentration. At the end of the day, when the other participants had already dispersed, they stayed behind, sitting on a park bench, comparing the photos they had taken. "And this one is really good," Lisa commented, looking at an image Mark had captured of an old man blowing soap bubbles for children. "You have an eye for genuine moments." "I have an eye for narratives," he corrected with an almost smile. "And that is what I do in advertising, identify the story that needs to be told." Lisa returned the smile. "And what is the story you want to tell, Mark?" The question came out more personal than she intended. He looked at her directly, his guard momentarily lowered. "I still don't know. For a long time, I thought it was the story of success. Then it became the story of loss." His eyes met hers with an intensity that made her heart race. Or maybe it's time to discover a new chapter. In that moment, with the sun setting and painting Houston's sky in shades of orange and pink, something changed between them. A small bridge built over the abyss of differences that separated them. And when Mark offered a ride back to the mansion, Lisa accepted with the strange sensation that she was entering dangerous but irresistibly attractive territory. What she did not know was that night, for the first time in 2 years, Mark would dream not of the faces of his missing parents, but of vibrant brown eyes that saw beyond the walls he had so meticulously built around his heart. The first heavy autumn rain lashed the windows of the mansion when Lisa, wrapped in a soft blanket in the library, heard the sound of keys and the front door opening. It was almost midnight, and she hadn't expected Mark to return. He had mentioned in the morning that he would have meetings until late at the agency. "What are you doing awake at this hour?" His voice sounded closer than she expected, making her jump slightly. Mark was standing at the entrance to the library, his hair and overcoat wet from the rain, his tie loose around his neck. "I couldn't sleep," Lisa confessed, closing the photography book she was leafing through. "Storms always make me restless." She hesitated, observing his soaked state. "You look like you need a towel and a hot drink." A tired smile touched his lips. "I can provide the towel, but would you like company for the drink?" 20 minutes later, they were sitting on opposite sides of the library sofa. Mark, now dry in casual clothes, jeans and a sweater that made him look surprisingly accessible, while they sipped whiskey with honey that Martha had prepared before retiring. "So what is keeping the great advertising magnate working so late on a stormy night?" Lisa asked, trying to keep the tone light despite the strange intimacy of the situation. Mark swirled the amber liquid in his glass, observing the reflections. "In the firelight, we're about to launch a campaign for a luxury watch brand. The concept is time, the only luxury that truly matters." And he paused, his eyes meeting hers. "Ironic, isn't it? I spend my days selling the idea that time is precious while wasting my own." The vulnerability in his confession caught Lisa off guard. "Do you think you're wasting your time?" "I built an empire that consumes 16 hours of my day. I live in a mansion too big for one person, and my only regular company is a team that treats me like I am made of crystal since the accident." He took a long sip of his whiskey. "If that's not waste, I don't know what would be." Lisa pulled her legs up onto the sofa, adjusting the blanket. "You know what's funny about photography? No matter how many times you capture the same object, each photo will be unique. The light changes, the angle changes, the moment changes." She paused, searching for the right words. "Maybe the problem isn't how you spend your time, but the perspective from which you observe it." You speak like a philosopher, not a photographer," he commented, but there was a tone of admiration in his voice. "They were closer professions than one might think." Lisa smiled. "Both seek to capture truth, even if from different angles." And the conversation flowed with surprising ease after that. Mark told stories about disastrous campaigns and unexpected triumphs. Lisa shared stories of her work as a freelance photographer, including a wedding where the groom ran away, and she ended up documenting, instead of a celebration, the birth of an unlikely friendship between the abandoned bride and the groom's mother. "How do you manage it?" Mark asked suddenly, after a particularly amusing story about a photo shoot with children that had ended with Lisa covered in mud. "Manage what?" "See humor where most would see only frustration. Find beauty in imperfect situations." Lisa reflected for a moment. My mother died when I was 16, she revealed, surprising herself with the confidence. It was sudden, an aneurysm. One day she was making pancakes in the kitchen, the next, gone. She took a deep breath, feeling the familiar tightness in her chest. After the funeral, I found a box of old photos. There was one in particular, my mother laughing until she cried on a swing, with her hair completely disheveled by the wind. It wasn't a technically good photo. It was even a bit out of focus, but it captured her essence perfectly. Is that when you decided to become a photographer? Lisa nodded. I realized that we can lose people, moments, places, but when we capture their essence, somehow they stay with us. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the crackling of the fireplace and the drumming of rain on the windows. Lisa watched Mark take the last sip of his whiskey, noting how the firelight softened the hard angles of his face, revealing the man behind the persona of the ruthless businessman. "Can I ask you a personal question?" she ventured. Mark raised an eyebrow, but nodded. "Why did you hire someone to catalogue the collection now? Martha mentioned that you hardly looked at the work since the accident." He was silent for so long that Lisa feared she had crossed an invisible line. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, almost a confessional whisper. "My therapist suggested that I needed to start making peace with the memories instead of trying to bury them." Mark set the empty glass on the coffee table. "The collection was my parents' passion. Each piece has a story that they shared. With me, ignoring it was like," he searched for the right word, "like losing a bit more of them each day." And Lisa felt a lump in her throat. "And is it working, making peace with the memories?" Mark looked at her directly, and for the first time since she had met him, Lisa saw not just pain in his eyes, but also a glimmer of hope. "I think it's starting to work. Having you here, seeing the collection through new eyes, it helps somehow." The moment was interrupted by Mark's phone. He looked at the screen with a grimace. "Sorry, I need to take this. Problems with the watch campaign." While he spoke in a low voice from the other side of the room, Lisa allowed herself to observe him, the way he ran his hand through his hair when he was frustrated, how his posture instantly changed to the confident executive, how his eyes occasionally turned to her, as if checking if she was still there. When he hung up, Mark looked exhausted. "I need to go to the agency early tomorrow. The creative team is having difficulties with the visual concept. Can I help?" The words came out before Lisa could contain them. "I mean, I have experience with advertising photography. Maybe an outside perspective would help." Mark studied her, clearly debating the idea internally. "Shouldn't you be focused on the cataloging?" "I am ahead of schedule, and besides," she smiled, "I'm also starting to feel a bit claustrophobic here. As beautiful as your mansion is, a little professional fresh air would be welcome." "All right," he conceded, surprising her. "Leave at 8 a.m. I'll ask the driver to take you." Lisa shook her head. "I have a car, remember? I just need the address." An almost smile touched his lips. "Of course, I forgot that you are perfectly capable of finding your own way." There was an unspoken admiration in those words that made Lisa's heart race. When they got up to retire, there was a moment, brief but laden with possibilities, when they were standing too close to each other by the library door. Mark's eyes fell on Lisa's lips, and for an instant she thought he would lean. And instead, he took a step back. "Good night, Lisa. Thank you for the company." "Good night, Mark," she replied, ignoring the twinge of disappointment. As she headed to her room, Lisa could not help but think that something was changing between them, something delicate and dangerous, like the first buds of spring, vulnerable to the slightest frost, but determined to grow toward the light. What she didn't know was that in his master suite, Mark was standing by the window, watching the storm and holding the photograph of his parents that normally stayed face down on his bedside table. For the first time in a long time, he looked at the portrait without feeling just pain, but also a faint sensation that perhaps, just maybe, there was room in his heart for something beyond grief. Williams and partners occupied the top 3 floors of a skyscraper in Houston ES Financial Center. Lisa, dressed in a blazer over a simple t-shirt and jeans, the most formal her wardrobe allowed, felt slightly intimidated as the elevator smoothly rose to the 42nd floor. The doors opened to a space that looked like it came out of a design magazine. Glass walls, minimalist furniture, and everywhere, brilliant examples of advertising campaigns that had transformed unknown brands into household names. You must be Lisa. A tall woman with a perfect geometric haircut and an impeccable suit approached her before she could even orient herself. I am Vivian, creative director, and Mark S. right hand. Her handshake was firm, professional. He rarely brings outsiders to our crisis meetings. You must be special. There was something sharp in her tone, a poorly disguised curiosity that made Lisa feel analyzed. I am just someone with a different perspective, Lisa replied with a polite smile, and I am currently cataloging the Williams family art collection. Something in Vivian S. face changed, as if a puzzle piece clicked into place. You are the photographer. Mark mentioned he was bringing someone to give a fresh look at the Chronos campaign. Come, we all in the conference room. Elisa followed Vivian through the busy office, noticing the curious looks that followed her. Clearly, Mark Williams didn't have the habit of bringing strangers to the inner sanctuary of his agency. The conference room was dominated by a long table where at least 10 people were gathered, looking exhausted and frustrated. Mark was standing at the head, reviewing mock-ups spread across the surface. He looked up when they entered. Lisa, welcome. His tone was professional, but there was an almost imperceptible gleam in his eyes. Everyone, this is Lisa Gonzalez, the photographer. I mentioned she has experience with advertising photography and offered an external perspective for our situation. Lisa felt the evaluative looks of the team and resisted the urge to nervously adjust her blazer. Instead, she approached the table to examine the concepts. What exactly is the problem? She asked, trying to sound confident. A man with glasses and a meticulously trimmed beard sighed. The concept time, the only luxury that truly matters, is strong, but we were having difficulty translating it visually without falling into cliches. We already tried the executive running for the train, the sunset over the urban skyline, the family gathered in precious moments, listed a young woman with blue hair. Everything seems to have been done 1,000 times before. Lisa studied the mock-ups, absorbing the previous attempts. The watch was beautiful, minimalist, elegant, with an air of discreet sophistication. But the images surrounding it seemed disconnected, generic. The problem, she finally said, is that you were trying to show time as something external, when the true luxury of time is how it transforms us from within. She looked at Mark, who was watching her with intensity. You need images that show transformation, not just frozen moments. A reflective silence followed her words. Mark tilted his head slightly. Continue. Feeling more confident, Lisa walked around the table. What if, instead of showing what people do with time, we show what time does to people? A diptych, the same subject at 2 significantly different moments, not just chronologically, but emotionally. Like a before and after, someone asked skeptically. No, not that literal. Lisa picked up a pencil and began sketching on a blank paper. Imagine a series of pairs, a musician playing the same piece, once with perfect technique, another with deep emotion after years of life. A chef preparing the same dish, first with meticulous precision, then with the relaxed confidence of experience. She looked at Mark again. Time isn't just about aging or collecting moments. It says about how we evolve, how our experiences change our relationship with the world. Vivian leaned forward, clearly intrigued. It is an interesting approach. It shows the value of time through its depth, not its scarcity. Exactly. Lisa felt a wave of excitement. The slogan could be complemented with something like, "Don T count the seconds. Make the seconds count." Mark, who had remained silent, suddenly tapped lightly on the table. "That is it. That's exactly what we were looking for." He looked at his team. "I want visual options based on this concept by the end of the day. Vivian, work with the copywriters to adjust the text." The meeting gained new breath, with ideas being rapidly launched. Lisa watched fascinated as the creative team transformed her basic concept into something more elaborate and polished. Occasionally, her eyes met Mark S., and there was something in his gaze that made her heart race, a mixture of professional admiration and something more personal that she dared not name. After 2 intense hours, the team dispersed to work on their tasks, and Lisa found herself alone with Mark in a small adjacent room, surrounded by awards his agency had won over the years. "You saved weeks of work in 2 hours, he said, serving 2 cups of coffee. "Impressive, doesn't to begin to describe it." Lisa accepted the cup, trying to ignore the tingling in her fingers when they briefly touched. It was just a change in perspective. Sometimes when we reach too close to a problem, we lose the big picture. That is a lesson that applies to more than advertising, isn't it? Mark leaned on the edge of the desk, studying her with a look that seemed to penetrate beyond her carefully constructed defenses. "You have this gift, Lisa, of seeing beyond the obvious, of finding meaning where others see only surface." She felt the heat rise up her neck. "It's a useful skill for a photographer. And for a friend," he added, the word friend seeming inadequate for whatever was growing between them. A silence laden with possibilities hung between them, broken by the ring of Mark S.'s cell phone. He looked at the screen and sighed. "The client is arriving earlier. I need to go." "Should I return to the mansion?" asked Lisa, surprised by the twinge of disappointment she felt. Actually, Mark hesitated, running his hand through his hair in a gesture that Lisa already recognized as a sign of nervousness. "I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner with me tonight, to thank you for your help today." Lisa blinked, momentarily speechless. "Are you inviting me to a business dinner?" Mark smiled, and it was a genuine smile that completely transformed his face. "No, Lisa, I'm inviting you to dinner. Just a dinner between 2 people who may be starting to know each other beyond the professional." Lisa's heart raced. "And in that case, I'd love to." "Great. I'll meet you at the mansion at 8. He paused at the door. "And Lisa, thank you for today, for seeing something that we all missed." When he left, Lisa stood there, holding the coffee cup and feeling as if she were on the edge of something simultaneously exciting and frightening. Mark Williams, the reclusive millionaire, had just invited her to a dinner that sounded dangerously like a date. The restaurant was the kind of establishment that didn't display prices on the menu, a small, exclusive place hidden on the top floor of a historic building with only 8 tables and a panoramic view of Houston. Lisa, wearing a simple black dress that she had fortunately brought for emergencies, felt out of place until she saw the expression on Mark S.'s face when he met her in the lobby. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "You don't look bad." "Yourself," she replied, trying to ease her own nervousness. Mark had traded the corporate suit for a darker one, clearly tailored, which accentuated his broad shoulders. The mate led them to the most private table by the window. Lisa noticed how the staff treated Mark with a respectful familiarity that suggested he was more than just a wealthy customer. "Do you come here often?" she asked, after the sommelier served a wine that Mark had chosen without consulting the menu. "It was my parents' favorite restaurant," he replied, a melancholic smile touching his lips. "They celebrated their wedding anniversary here every year for almost 3 decades. Lisa felt the weight of that confidence. "And this is the first time you've brought someone here since—" Mark nodded, looking at the illuminated city outside. "This place held too many memories, good memories that hurt more than the bad ones." He turned his gaze back to her. "But then I realized something after the conversation in the library. Maybe avoiding happy memories is a strange form of betrayal, as if I were letting the pain erase all the good that existed before." "It takes brave to come back," Lisa said softly, "to honor the past without letting it trap you." "I don't know if it is courage or simply exhaustion," Mark confessed. "I'm tired of living, by half, Lisa, of keeping everyone at a safe distance." His eyes met hers with an intensity that made her catch her breath. "And then you arrived with your camera and your different angles, and suddenly I found myself wanting to let someone get close again." The dinner proceeded in a perfect mixture of deep conversations and moments of lightness. Lisa told him about her dream of one day opening a studio focused on photographing ordinary people with the same reverence dedicated to celebrities. Mark talked about the early days of his agency, when he slept in the office and lived on coffee and determination. "Why advertising?" Lisa asked as they savored dessert. "With your resources, you could do anything." Mark considered the question. "Then I think I've always been fascinated by the idea of shaping narratives, of creating emotional connections through images and words." He smiled. "It is not so different from what you do with photography, just with a commercial objective." "And was it worth it, all the sacrifice to build the empire?" The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken meanings. Mark slowly swirled his wineglass, considering. "Until 2 years ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. Now—" He stared at her with a vulnerability Lisa had never seen. "Now I realize that success without anyone to share it with is just a sophisticated form of loneliness." When they left the restaurant, the night was surprisingly cool for Houston. Mark asked if she would like to walk a bit before returning, and Lisa agreed, secretly grateful for a few more moments in his company. They walked side by side through the nearby park, their hands occasionally brushing in a way that sent small waves of electricity up Lisa's arm. The moon was almost full, bathing the path in an ethereal silver light. "You know what's strange?" Mark said suddenly. "I've known you for only a few weeks, but I feel like I could tell you things I've never told anyone." Lisa smiled. "Maybe it is because I don't have expectations about who you should be. I didn't know Mark Williams before the tragedy, so I am not waiting for you to go back to being that person." He considered her words. "It's liberating in a way. It's like starting with a blank canvas," she agreed. "No history, just possibilities." Mark stopped walking, turning to face her. They were under an old oak tree, his face partially in shadow, but his eyes shining intensely in the dark. "Lisa, He hesitated, suddenly seeming uncertain. "Yes?" she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. Instead of speaking, he stepped forward, raising his hand to lightly touch her face. Lisa felt herself freeze and melt simultaneously. And then, with a surprising gentleness for a man of such strong presence, Mark leaned in and kissed her. It was a light kiss at first, almost hesitant, as if he expected her to pull back. But Lisa moved closer, her hands finding their way to his shoulders, the kiss deepening with an intensity that left her breathless. When they finally separated, both seemed equally surprised by what had happened. "Sorry," he said automatically, then smiled. "Actually, I am not sorry at all." Lisa laughed, feeling dizzy and more alive than she had felt in years. "Neither am I." On the way back to the mansion, in the back seat of the car with a driver, they sat closer than necessity required, their fingers intertwined in the space between them. It was a beginning, fragile and new, but filled with possibilities that neither dared to fully name. What Lisa didn't know, as she contemplated the city lights passing by the window, was that Vivian had carefully observed her interaction with Mark throughout the day. And that, at that exact moment, the creative director was making a call that would change everything between them. "Hello? Yes, this is Vivian Reynolds. I need to talk to you about Lisa Gonzalez, Mark's new friend. I think I found something. You'll want to know." Dawn found Lisa awake, watching the first rays of sun through the window of her room in the Williams mansion. She hadn't slept much. Her mind kept reliving every moment of the previous night, every word, every touch, the kiss under the oak tree that had changed everything between them. Her phone vibrated with a message. "Coffee on the veranda?" With her heart racing, she dressed quickly. Jeans, simple t-shirt, hair tied in an unpretentious bun. For a moment, she considered whether she should dress up more, but then smiled at her reflection. Mark had kissed her when she was simply being herself. There was no need for pretenses now. He was already on the veranda when she arrived, casually, dressed, checking something on his laptop. Seeing her, his face lit up in a way that made Lisa's stomach do a somersault. "Good morning," he said, standing up to pull out a chair for her. "Did you sleep well?" "Honestly, not much." Lisa smiled, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. "A lot on my mind." "Good things, I hope." There was a vulnerability in his question that surprised her. Definitely good. She felt her cheeks warm. "Different from anything I expected when I accepted this job." Mark smiled, visibly relaxing. "I'm glad to hear that, because He paused, as if testing the words. "I wasn't planning this, Lisa, meeting you, feeling what I am feeling, but I am happy it happened." Lisa was about to respond when Martha appeared, looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Williams, sorry to interrupt, but Miss Reynolds is here. She says it's urgent." Mark frowned, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "Vivian, here? Tell her I'll be at the office in an hour." "No, she insists she needs to speak with you now, sir." "It is about..." Martha cast a nervous glance at Lisa. "Miss Gonzalez." The skepticism on Mark's face quickly transformed into concern. "Ask her to join us here then." The minutes until Vivian's arrival were tense. Lisa tried to imagine what the creative director could want to discuss about her, but nothing made sense. When Vivian finally appeared on the veranda, her cold, calculating gaze immediately put Lisa on alert. "Mark, I'm sorry to interrupt your breakfast," said Vivian, the hesitation loaded with insinuations. "But I needed to show you this, immediately." She extended a folder. "What is this, Viv?" Mark seemed more confused than concerned. "I did some basic research on Ms. Gonzalez last night. Standard procedure for anyone we bring into a sensitive project." She cast a look at Lisa, and I found something interesting. Mark opened the folder reluctantly. Lisa watched his expression change as he examined the contents. Confusion, then shock, and finally what appeared to be betrayal. "Lisa, can you explain this?" He turned the folder toward her. Lisa gasped at what it contained. Photographs. Her photographs. But not just any photographs. They were the images she had taken 3 years ago, working for Urban Exposé magazine, on a series of investigative articles about the unethical practices of large companies. And there, prominently featured, was her most awarded article, The invisible faces of predatory advertising. An exposé on how large advertising agencies, including Williams and Partners, had consciously and deliberately targeted alcohol and gambling campaigns at vulnerable communities. I don't understand, stammered Lisa, genuinely confused. What does this have to do with anything? You didn't tell me you had already written an article condemning my company, said Mark, his voice dangerously controlled. An article that almost cost us 3 important clients and forced us to completely rebuild our ethics policy. Mark, that was 3 years ago. I didn't even make the connection when I accepted this job. Lisa felt panic growing in her chest. It was an investigative piece based on data. It wasn't personal. Not personal? His voice rose slightly. You literally quoted me, Lisa. You used a photo of me from the conference room saying that I and other industry leaders were consciously exploiting at-risk populations for corporate profit. Lisa felt the blood drain from her face. It was true. She had used a photo of Mark at an industry event, but she had never met him personally. At the time, he was just another name in her investigation. I was doing my job as a photojournalist, she defended herself. And everything I wrote was factual, based on leaked internal documents and testimonies from former employees. Vivian intervened with fake concern. Mark, don't you find it strange that she showed up right now? When we're about to launch our biggest campaign since the ethical rebranding? A photographer who coincidentally also writes articles exposing advertising agencies. Wait! Are you implying that I planned this? That I accepted this job to, what? Spy on the agency? Lisa looked from Vivian to Mark, incredulous. Mark, that is absurd. You were the one who contacted me. A flash of doubt crossed Marcus' face. Not exactly. It was the talent agency that recommended you. I never checked the details. It was pure coincidence. I didn't even know it would be for you until I received the address for the interview. Lisa felt the ground opening beneath her feet. All the progress between them, all the trust they had slowly built, was crumbling before her eyes. Mark closed the folder, his face returning to the impassive mask of the executive Lisa had met on the first day. I think we need to reassess our situation, Ms. Gonzalez. The formal use of her surname was like a slap. Mark, please. Don't let this erase everything that happened between us. Yes, I wrote that article. Yes, I criticized industry practices, including your company. But that was before I knew you, before I understood. Understood what? The coldness in his voice made her shudder. That I am not just a two-dimensional corporate villain, convenient for your narrative. That maybe there are complexities that your simplistic article completely ignored. Lisa felt tears burning in her eyes. Yes, exactly that. Mark, since I met you, I've seen the man behind the businessman. I've seen your pain, your struggle, your determination to honor. Your parents, I've seen how you really care about the impact of your work. For a moment, something wavered in his expression, a spark of the connection they had shared. But then Vivian put a hand on his arm. Mark, we have the board meeting in an hour. We need to discuss how to handle this professionally. She looked at Lisa with something close to satisfaction. I suggest Ms. Gonzalez collect her belongings while we away. We can hire another photographer to finish the cataloging. No, Mark said abruptly. But the contract specifies that she must complete the work. He turned to Lisa, his eyes cold. You will finish the cataloging as agreed, but our relationship now is strictly professional. Lisa felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. Mark, Ms. Gonzalez, he corrected rigidly. I shall be at the agency all day. Please continue your work without me. He stood up, taking his laptop. Let us go, Vivian. Lisa sat stunned as she watched them leave. The tears she had held back finally rolled down her cheeks when she heard the car's engine fading away. Martha appeared silently, placing a fresh cup of coffee in front of Lisa. "I don't know what happened, dear, but I've seen Mr. Williams angry before. He cools down with time." Lisa wiped the tears with the back of her hand. "Not this time, Martha. He thinks I betrayed his trust." The housekeeper sighed, sitting in the chair Mark had occupied. "Judge, since the accident, he'd built walls so high around himself that no one could climb them. No one until you." She gave a comforting pat on Lisa's hand. "And do you know what happens when we finally let someone in after protecting ourselves for so long? We get terrified. We look for the first excuse to push them away again." Lisa considered her words. "Do you think that is what he is doing, protecting himself?" "I think he found a convenient reason to return to the familiar, loneliness and distrust." Martha stood up. "The question is, are you going to let him run away so easily?" For the rest of the day, Lisa worked methodically, cataloging the last pieces of the collection. Each photograph now seemed loaded with meaning, memories of conversations with Mark about the works, stories he had shared, moments of vulnerability that had built the bridge between them. At night, she heard, when he returned, his heavy steps going up the stairs without stopping at her floor. The silence of the mansion seemed deafening. It was then that Lisa made a decision. She grabbed her camera and went down to the library, where it had all begun on that stormy night. She sat at the desk and began to write, the words flowing directly from her wounded heart. When she finished, she attached a photograph, not one of the artworks, but one she had taken of Mark at the photography workshop when he wasn't looking. It was a powerful image. Mark crouched down, photographing a simple daisy growing between cracks in the concrete, his face softened by concentration and a gentleness that few had the privilege of witnessing. Underneath, she wrote, "This is the truth I saw through my lens. The man, not the myth. The essence, not the appearance. You taught me to see beyond surfaces, Mark. Please do the same with me." Lisa left the letter and the photograph on the art book they had discussed that first night, and then, with a heavy heart, went up to her room to prepare her bags. Contract or not, she knew she couldn't stay there with the abyss that now existed between them. What she didn't know was that upstairs Mark was sitting in his private office, reviewing not just her article, but the entire ethical reformulation process that his company had implemented as a direct result of that exposé. And as the night progressed, an uncomfortable truth began to form in his mind. Maybe, just maybe, he was using this revelation not as a reason to push her away, but as an excuse to flee from what he feared most, loving again and risking another devastating loss. Epilogue. 6 months later. The photography workshop in Houston, AS Central Park, was packed. Lisa adjusted the microphone clipped to her blouse, smiling at the diverse crowd of aspiring photographers gathered around her. "Photography isn't just about capturing images," she began, her voice more confident than it had ever been. "It's about finding the hidden truth in every scene, in every face. It's about looking beyond the obvious and discovering the story that's waiting to be told." The last 6 months had transformed her life in ways she could never have predicted. After leaving the Williams mansion that fateful night, she had used her last savings to rent a small studio downtown. Determined not to give up on her dream, even with a broken heart, Lisa had launched a project called Unfiltered Truths, a photographic series documenting stories of ordinary people with extraordinary resilience. To her surprise, the project went viral. What had begun as a way to channel her pain became a phenomenon. Magazines started publishing her work, a gallery offered her an exhibition, and now she divided her time between paid photo sessions and workshops like this one. What no one in the crowd knew was that each photograph in her award-winning series had been somehow inspired by the moments she had shared with Mark. The way he looked at the art collection, how his expression changed. When talking about his parents, the vulnerability she had glimpsed beneath his carefully constructed facade. When we photograph people, Lisa continued, guiding the group toward a more shaded area of the park, our job is not just to document their appearance, but to honor their essence. To find the precise moment when the mask falls, even if for a second, and the truth emerges. That S, when she saw him, at the back of the crowd, partially hidden by a tree, but unmistakable. Mark Williams, without a suit, wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt, a camera hanging from his neck. Lisa felt her heart stop and then race. She tried to maintain her composure, continue the explanation about composition and lighting, but her eyes kept finding his. When she finally announced a free practice break, he didn't approach immediately. Instead, he stayed at a distance, taking pictures of flowers along the path. Lisa approached slowly, uncertain. 6 months without any contact, and now he was there, as if they had arranged to meet. "Your technique has improved," she said, when she was finally close enough to speak without being overheard by others. Mark lowered the camera, his eyes meeting hers. There was something different about him, a softness, a lightness that wasn't present before. "I had a good teacher, even if for a short time." A silence stretched between them, loaded with unspoken words. "I saw your Unfiltered Truths exhibition," he finally said. 3 times, actually. Lisa blinked, surprised. "You went to my exhibition?" "The first time was by chance. I was passing by the gallery on my way to a meeting." He looked at the ground, then back at her. "The other 2 were deliberate. I needed to understand." "Understand what?" "How you managed to see so much beauty in broken moments. How your photographs make people appear simultaneously vulnerable and strong." He paused, taking a deep breath. "How you managed to see me, really see me, even when I was doing everything to remain invisible." Lisa felt tears threatening to form. "Mark, no, please let me finish." He took a step closer. "I read your letter many times, and you were right. I used that article as an excuse. Not because I felt betrayed by you, but because I was frightened by what I was feeling." "And what were you feeling?" Lisa could barely breathe. "That I was falling in love with you. That for the first time since I lost my parents, there was something in my heart besides pain and work." His eyes never left hers. "It was easier to use anger and indignation than to admit that I was terrified by the idea of being vulnerable again, of risking another loss." "And now?" Lisa asked softly. "Now?" Mark smiled, a true smile that lit up his entire face. "Now, I'm tired of living in fear." Ironically, your article that so offended me ended up being the best thing that happened to my company. It forced us to change, to be better, just as you forced me to face parts of myself that I had been ignoring. He extended his hand, offering her a small velvet box. Lisa widened her eyes. "Mark, is that—" "No, it is not a ring," he laughed, noticing her expression. "Not yet. It is too early for that." She opened the box with trembling fingers, finding a beautiful silver key. "It is the key to the mansion," he explained. "Not as a contracted photographer, not as a temporary employee, but as whatever you want us to be." Lisa looked from the key to him, her heart overflowing. "Is this a request for me to come back?" "It is a request for us to start over. No secrets, no walls." Mark took her hands in his. "Vivian is gone, by the way. I offered her a transfer to our New York office after I discovered she had deliberately looked for something to separate us." "Why?" "Apparently, she had other plans for the future of the agency, and for mine." He shook his head. But that doesn't matter now. Lisa looked at the key in her hand, feeling the weight of everything it represented. 6 months ago, she had entered that mansion as a professional hired for a service. Now, she was being invited to enter as something much more significant. "We still have a lot to talk about," she finally said, closing her fingers around the key. "And many things to resolve. I know, and I am ready for that conversation, for all the conversations." He gently caressed her face. "But first, I have a very important question for you." Lisa held her breath, waiting. "Could you evaluate this photograph I took?" He showed her his camera screen, where a perfectly framed image captured Lisa, teaching, her face illuminated by passion, surrounded by attentive students. I was trying to capture the exact moment when someone transforms passion into inspiration." Lisa studied the image, touched by how he had managed to capture her essence in a way that few professional photographers could. The composition, the lighting, the moment, everything revealed not just technique, but a passionate gaze behind the lens. "It's perfect," she said, genuinely impressed. "You captured something very personal here. I had good inspiration." His eyes shone with a mixture of tenderness and admiration. "I learned from the best." One of the workshop participants called for Lisa, signaling that the break was ending. She looked reluctantly toward the group, then back at Mark. "I need to go back." "I know." He smiled, no longer the controlled smile of the executive, but that of a man who had finally found his way back to the light. "I'll be waiting for as long as necessary." Lisa clutched the key in her hand, feeling its comforting weight. "It won't be long," she promised, leaning in to give him a soft, quick kiss before returning to her group. As she walked away, she looked over her shoulder to see him still standing in the same place, watching her with a gaze that spoke of second chances and new beginnings. Mark raised his camera and took one more picture, an image that would eventually be framed and hung on the living room wall they would share, next to the first photograph she had taken of him in the winter garden. Some stories begin with a simple linear once upon a time. Others, like theirs, begin with misunderstandings, defenses raised by pain and fear, and paths that initially seem incompatible. But Lisa had learned, both as a photographer and as a woman who had unexpectedly fallen in love with a lonely millionaire, that the most beautiful stories are rarely the most perfect. They are those that contain light and shadow, focus and blur, loss and redemption, all captured in the imperfect and wonderfully human framing that we call love. When Lisa resumed the workshop, her voice carried a new energy that the students immediately noticed. "In photography, as in life," she said, glancing briefly in Marquis' direction, "sometimes we need to adjust our focus, change our perspective, and trust that even in the darkest moments, light will find a way in." And at the back of the crowd, Mark Williams, no longer the reclusive millionaire, but simply a man rediscovering joy, smiled and captured one more perfect moment through his lens.